John Dalton primarily contributes to Forrester's offerings for customer experience professionals who are leading enterprise-wide customer experience efforts. He is a leading expert on the intersection of branding, marketing, and experience design, governance, and understanding customer needs. Claire has specialized in customer feedback for over 15 years. Claire has run programs in the financial sector and more recently supported a wide range of organizations in the development and implementation of programs that not only drive improvement in customer experience, but they deliver measurable business results. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Claire.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Dina. So as Dina says, in today's webinar, John and I are going to talk about customer journey mapping as a key tool in improving customer experience. So if that's what we're going to be talking about, why have I put up a picture of an archaic map on the screen? Well, a few months ago, I was lucky enough to spend 5 hours at Warner Brothers Studios here in London at the making of Harry Potter with my kids. Now, it must be said, the tour was amazing. I really would recommend it to anybody. The tour was fantastic. And what was incredible, and I mean eye-wateringly incredible, was the prices in the shop. Be ready for this if you do go. My daughter wanted, and it must be said didn't get, a cloak. £70 for a cloak at Harry Potter World. And my son, he actually wanted this. And this is, of course, for all Harry Potter fans out there, the Marauders Map, a snip at £25. Now, in the book and the film, of course, this map, the Marauders Map, is, of course, magical. Not only does it show you all the secrets of Hogwarts Castle, but most importantly, it's not static. It's a map for action. It has moving images showing where all of the teachers were in the castle. Incredibly useful, as you can imagine, for Harry and his friends trying to get around the castle to do their secret deeds. So when we talk about customer journey maps, I think we really want the same thing, don't we? We're not only a clear understanding of the situation that we're in, but also those warnings and guidance as to when there might be trouble ahead. And that is really the theme of this webinar. How can we use customer journey maps to help us break down the silos and drive action within our organizations? So I'm lucky enough to be joined today by John Dalton from Forrester, who's got a wealth of experience in this area. John, why don't you give us a quick introduction?
Sure. So I'm a research director here at Forrester Research, which means that I'm responsible for doing a lot of content planning for our customer experience practice. And I have to say that one of the most highly demanded streams of our research concerns what we call customer understanding skills, which cover qualitative and quantitative research methods. And within that group of methods or tools, journey mapping is hands down the most popular topic among our clients. We get more inquiries around journey mapping than just about any other method or tool that customer experience or indeed user experience professionals are turning to for better insights into how well the journey and the experience are performing in the market. Regardless if it's B2B or B2C, journey mapping is really hot right now. And so despite that, however, we find that the maturity level and the application of journey mapping is very, very uneven across companies and across industry. So what we're going to do today, we thought it would be a good idea to level set with a poll. And so what we'd like to know from all of you is how long you've been using customer journey mapping in your organization. And it's quite all right if you haven't started yet at all. Many people have not. Have you started in the last year, couple of years, or more than a couple of years? And I can see the responses rolling in now. Yeah, this is actually, so far, this is, I would say, a fairly, this is a pretty typical distribution. We have a good number of people here participating, so it's nice Yeah, it's interesting. As these come in, I have to say, overall, the customer experience has really gained momentum in the past decade even. I mean, we've been doing customer experience research at Forrester since 1999, but in the last decade or so, it's really become quite popular. We find that there's still a lot of what we call immaturity in the market with respect to these kinds of tools and methods that we're talking about this morning, like journey mapping. I mean, 40% of you haven't started yet, 35% within the last year. That's 70+% are fairly unfamiliar with how this thing works, and about 9% more than a couple of years. It's rare that we find companies that have more than a couple of years experience with journey mapping. We do indeed find that some companies have a lot of experience, but that lot of experience is only 3 to 5 years. So that's very interesting. I don't know, Claire, if you have any comments you want to make at this point about these numbers, but to me they look absolutely in line with what we've seen at Forrester.
Absolutely, and hopefully, John, we've kind of pitched this webinar at about the right level for those people who potentially are thinking about customer journey mapping, and for those who have just started to dabble in the subject. But yep. I'm quite aware, actually, that we've introduced the poll without actually defining what we mean by customer journey mapping. And so maybe that's the first step that we should come to. Because customer journey mapping means so many different things to different people. It's a phrase that's used to describe many different approaches and activities. So as a structure to this webinar, we've decided to split customer journey mapping into these 3 key areas. So when we think about the purpose of our map, we can think of it in these 3 key areas: defining our destination, knowing where we need to get to. The second one being around a shared roadmap. And the third piece around navigation, having the capability to check that not only are we heading in the right direction, but that we're not going to hit anything on the way. So what John and I will be aiming to do is to provide a very quick introduction to each of these, and hopefully along the way provide you with a little bit of best practice in each aspect of the customer journey mapping. So let's move on to the first piece around defining our destination. And what this is about is very much around a shared vision. Let's all agree where we're headed based on our customers' requirements. So most organizations, and it would be great to put up another poll now to understand how many organizations out there have got that vision and mission statement to make sure that we're headed in the same direction. Now, I've put a few examples up on the screen, and as you can see, quite often they're very detailed documents giving a lot of information around the vision, mission, and values of our organizations. And they're great in that they ensure that we're all heading in the same direction, but they can be quite difficult to assimilate, and they can be seen as being too prescriptive. So what we end up with is, yes, we're all headed in the same direction, we're all on the same road, but we now get stuck in a traffic jam. Because the issue is not around how we get to the destination. What's important is that we all know where we're headed. We have that shared vision, and we have that understanding of where we want to end up being. But we need to recognize that different parts of the organization will be taking different roads to get there. And that's fine. We just need to be sure that we all know that we're headed in the same direction. And this is really, for me, where pictures say 1,000 words. Pictures can be so much more helpful and easier to remember when you're en route. So, to reiterate, customer journey mapping should provide us with a clear understanding of where we're headed, what good looks like, and critically, what good looks like from our customers' perspective. And that's what we're trying to achieve with this piece around defining our destination. John, I think this takes us really nicely to your point around, the customer lens. Why don't I hand over to you? You can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're absolutely right. You're trying to establish some sense of what our destination is as an organization. And what we find that is most powerful about journey mapping at the highest level is that it is a wonderful, low-resolution tool. You don't need, a lot of high production values to go into journey mapping at all, as you can see here in this slide. Very, very accessible. Anyone can do it. But it's a wonderful tool that really provides a kind of corrective lens from the customer standpoint of how your organization is delivering a service or an experience or even a product, and the services around that product, the experiences around that product. Established companies are in silos, and there are good historical reasons why there's been so much departmentalization of large companies to achieve scale and efficiencies and so forth. Those decisions were not dumb decisions by any stretch. But as you enter to an age where consumers have so much more flexibility and control over information, and they're moving across channels and across devices, those silos can be real impediments to understanding the context in which your customers actually operate. And so journey mapping is a really good, it's great, accessible tool, accessible to many people, to put on a different perspective and actually look at your organization through the experience of a customer. And that corrective lens we typically refer to as sort of an outside-in perspective rather than inside-out, rather from the business unit, from the customer's perspective. Because this can be a very jarring perspective to many organizations, we find that overwhelmingly most companies are using journey maps as a diagnostic tool. So the diagnostic use of a journey map is simply when you're doing this to better understand where the gaps are between the promise that you're delivering through your brand and where the experience is falling short. And journey mapping is a wonderful way to step-by-step see where your email campaigns, your phone interactions, your web interactions, your billing, your paper documents, where there's pain, where there's conflict, and where you can start to see opportunities for improvement. So overwhelmingly, many of you are just starting out with journey mapping. One of the first things people do is diagnose current state problems. But this is also what we find is, if you might think of it as the ripple effect of journey mapping, for many organizations who didn't intend to use them in this way as primarily, is they have a profound impact on the broader organization that does this. Journey maps are a wonderful way to create a shared understanding of your customer's experience. Never underestimate the power of visuals to bring people together, to talk, in some cases to argue, and to come to a better understanding of what role their department, their role itself plays in shaping or informing the customer's experience. And I think this notion of creating that kind of shared understanding is one of the more powerful benefits of doing journey mapping.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, John, around the importance of using journey mapping as a tool to share understanding, and that really brings us onto the second aspect and the second purpose of journey mapping. This shared roadmap. So once if we understand where we're headed, we understand what good looks like and our final destination. I think for me, one of the key benefits of the journey map is this ability to use it as a shared roadmap, a common understanding of the landscape that we're working in and the different routes, those different routes that are available to us to get us to where we want to be. In my experience, organizations have got lots of people who are all passionate about customer experience, but they're all sitting in their own separate cars. They're sitting in those separate silos, as you were saying, John, reading their own maps. And we can therefore potentially end up with a situation where we have poor exchange of information, duplication of effort, inconsistency across the different functions within our organization, and potentially even no common standards. So how can we get people out of their cars, out of those silos, and facilitate them working together and communicating effectively? And this is really the point of the title of this webinar, is around how can we use customer journey mapping to break down those barriers so we can align efforts across these different silos. So the idea being that we really need to start getting people out of their cars and into one place, get them together in one bus to help actually start going through the process of customer journey mapping as a process of tracking and describing our current state. All the experiences that customers have as they encounter a service or set a service, taking account not only what happens to them, but their emotional response. So critically, what we need to do is ensure that we get the right people in the room, the right people who actually have an understanding across all of these different silos, the different parts of our organization. Let's take the opportunity with customer journey maps to bring them together and enable them to start to understand the soup to nuts of the customer journey. So let's say we've got them together in a room. What do we need to do with them? And please excuse me, this is very simplistic, but what I've tried to do is break down the steps of customer journey mapping into 3 key areas. Step 1 is very much about understanding our touch points. Understand them with regard to the customer's outside-in perspective, as John was saying. Now, critically, I've put up there a ridiculously simplistic customer journey map. And I think what's really important here is to think about it in terms of journeys or goals rather than just those individual touch points. McKinsey has published some really interesting statistics on this, and they found that organizations who are able to skillfully manage the entire experience, so not breaking it down just to managing individual touch points, but looking at goals and small journeys and longer term journeys that their customers are following. Those are the organizations who reap the largest rewards around, obviously, enhanced customer satisfaction across the whole of that journey and the individual goals that customers have, but also around reduced churn, increased revenue, greater employee satisfaction, all of those key benefits that your customer experience program can deliver. And this is about finding more effective ways to collaborate across functions, across levels within your organization, a process that delivers gains throughout your organization as a whole. So my key point for this step 1 is very much think about the goals of individual customers rather than the touch points that we have that where they touch our organization. Think around goals and journeys rather than touch points in isolation. Now, the issue is that, I've shown you a very simple customer journey there. Unfortunately, these things can get much more complex. Here we can see an example from Virgin Media, and this was their customer journey in draft, starting to show each of the individual customer touch points and the goals and implications along the way. So, step 1, let's make sure that we have the customer journey in place. Step 2 is around understanding current performance and ownership. Again, for the purpose of this webinar, I've kept this as simple as I can. But this is a key activity that when you brought your people together from their different silos, is as well as mapping out that high-level customer journey, this group can then look at what are the moments of truth within the organisation, and also how are we doing. Now, of course, both the moment of truth and how we're doing needs to be ratified with customers themselves. But from my personal experience, if you get the right people in the room and you have that cross-functional view, it's amazing how accurate your internal team can be around firstly understanding which of these touch points are absolutely the moments of truth and how are we doing at the moment. So that's the kind of first half of step 2. But the second piece, in some ways, I think is even more important, around ownership. Again, when we've got these people in the room mapping the customer journey, this is our opportunity to understand who in our organisation is going to take responsibility for driving improvement in a particular area. So this group can start mapping who is the most appropriate function to take responsibility for an individual touchpoint experience or goal. How much effort do they have to put into that particular touchpoint? And also who else is going to be involved? Which other parts of the organisation are going to be key to driving improvement and change in this aspect of the customer journey? So that's my kind of step 2 of customer journey mapping. The third piece, and unfortunately this is a piece that often we seem to forget, is around socializing and sharing. Customer journey mapping is a great tool to enable us to start having this shared understanding across our customers, our champions, our leaders, everyone, to make sure that we do all understand where we're headed and what we're trying to achieve. But again, we need to make sure that this isn't static. Unfortunately, what I have found is that once people start to draw up their customer journey and make it a very beautiful document, it does become a picture that sits on the wall, and then there's the potential issue of it becoming static. You know, our customer journey map needs to be a living tool. It needs to be something that we use as a rallying point, but it is very much a starting point to enable us to start to redesign individual touch points, to redesign customer-facing actions and communications, and really to act as a framework for collaboration and decision-making. So, John, why don't I take that opportunity to pass over to you to talk around, the Foresters' insights in this area.
Right. I mean, you've touched on a very important point here, which is that too often journey maps end up collecting dust in someone's drawer. But what we find is that when you take this outside-in approach to better understanding how the customer experiences your services one step at a time, that you find that these things are applicable to just about every single aspect of a customer experience program. And I'd like to share with you some of our findings from some research that one of the analysts who reports to me has done. His name is Tony Costa, who is our journey mapping expert in terms of doing primary research on this topic. And what Tony has found is that once you've actually defined a journey map and you've created a map that describes a customer's interactions with a company, leading companies are finding they can augment this one map with additional data to drive a lot of different activities and types of analysis. You can add the customer's emotional perception as a filter on top of, as a lens, another lens on top of the map to understand how painful these moments of truth are or how delightful they are. You can define the ecosystem of people, processes, and tools that enable an experience. We're talking just briefly there about getting the right stakeholders in the room, and that's absolutely critical. Once you bring in technology managers into a journey mapping exercise, I can guarantee you they're going to want to start connecting the dots between the website's dysfunction or the call center's dysfunction and the processes behind those technologies that may well be responsible for some kind of glitch that's compromising the customer's perception of value. And one way to do that is to take that journey map and then draw a line of invisibility below that journey map and start talking about the people and processes and tools that the customer doesn't see and may not ever touch, but are absolutely critical to supporting that journey. And we find that there's journey mapping best practices, they span 6 core activities, and I'm going to just walk you through these rather quickly. And I apologize, these are very dense slides, but slides are leave-behinds as well, so I'm hoping that you'll be able to read these and consult them later. But we find that the journey maps provide a solid foundation for understanding, assessing, and designing customer experiences, which you can look at and see involves understanding the elements behind a customer experience that you and your business unit may not have considered, assess the performance of that customer journey, again a diagnostic use, and designing customer experiences. We also find that journey maps are used by companies to align employees and cultures to the customer's needs, plan and manage customer experience programs for the long term, build a roadmap, and inform broader business agendas like nudging corporate funding decisions or informing broader strategy revision. Take a look here. If you just take a look at the understanding, assessing, and designing customer experience, we found that there's a lot of activity here. This is way too dense to read through, but people are, when you get into assessing strengths and weaknesses across the entire life cycle, they're getting into conducting life cycle analysis to identify service gaps. People are finding these tools very useful for mapping the competitor's journey. We find that people are doing benchmarking with journey mapping. If you take a look at aligning and planning and informing essential CX management activities across, there's a huge use of journey mapping emerging in culture transformation. We talk about having that shared vision. The journey map that is not static and that really has a life of its own, more often than not, the first way that customer experience professionals enjoy success with journey mapping beyond just solving a problem that they couldn't solve without creating that shared vision is in taking that and socializing it throughout the enterprise as part of training. It's not just Airbnb that uses journey mapping to train and onboard new hires. A lot of established companies are finding the same kind of power in this tool. Planning and managing customer experience programs. We find that one of particularly interesting recent use that Tony uncovered from a very large company in Europe was actually using journey mapping to uncover holes in their measurement programs. So that by going through every step of a very important customer's journey, they could see where they didn't have the right metrics to better understand what was really going on there and how important that problem was. Claire talked about your intuitions being good. Absolutely. But in many organizations, you're going to need to go beyond intuition to make that business case for getting the 7 figures you may need to really tackle a problem. Sure enough, journey mapping is being used by a lot of professionals to make that case for new metrics or improved metrics or focusing their metric efforts on a couple of areas. And the fact of the matter is, you will find that as in the leading companies who are doing journey mapping now more than just once, but are actually rinsing and repeating across silos, across products, across business units, they actually come up with a kind of interesting problem, which is they have so many journey maps they don't quite know what to do with them. And so we found that there's actually a trend now where people are starting to dabble with what they call journey atlases. Now, we didn't coin this term. It's a term that is being used by some agencies and some private practitioners we know out there, some customer experience professionals who've been in the game for a few years. But really what the atlas is a kind of, if you look at the slide, you'll see in blue, discover, join, access, use, get support, re-engage, or leave. That's kind of what you might think of as a customer life cycle, an archetypal life cycle journey from many marketers use to organize their campaigns and think about messaging. An atlas is using something like a life cycle, as here, to then plug in where the journeys they've mapped apply. So these journeys underneath the lifecycle map are journeys that have currently been mapped. And you can see that you discover all kinds of really interesting and important things, like journeys sometimes cross several different stages of the life cycle, which necessarily means they may cross several different stakeholders or business units, etc. And you can start to assemble through this atlas a really nice view of your gaps where you don't have much insight into what's going on post-sales or pre-sales, where you have real pain that may span different parts of your organization, and where there's opportunity to either do further mapping or maybe even different kinds of analysis using other tools to drill down on what's going on there. It is a rare tool, I admit. Not everyone is doing atlas mapping yet, but for those of you who are advanced, it may be something you want to investigate or explore a little more. It's an equally powerful tool in terms of creating that shared vision, but it can be a little more unwieldy to create and share for sure.
I think what I really like about this, John, is that your point on the figure at the moment is that it's only the yellow pieces where the journey map has actually been completed. But what the atlas is doing is providing you with a framework and saying to the organization, hey, this is complex. This isn't easy what we're trying to do here as an organization. Let's understand the framework that we're working in, and we're going to focus in on some key journeys, some key activities, some key goals, and we're going to focus first on building the journey map for those, but with that understanding of how they all fit together, which I think is beautifully shown on the slide that you have at the moment. Great. Okay, so we're going to move now on to our third piece, and in many ways, this is really the most important. How can we use customer journey mapping not as that pretty picture that sits on the wall, but something that is a living, breathing tool that's really going to be driving value for our organizations. So before I just jump into that, we thought we'd just run another quick poll. Now, this is going to be a little bit difficult for those of you who haven't actually started yet with your customer journey maps. But for I think it was about 50% of people who are on the call right at the very beginning. We've had others join as we've been talking. If you could start completing the poll that's up at the moment. So how valuable has customer journey mapping been in supporting your customer experience program? Is it too early to tell? Is it actually poor? It's not actually living up to the hype. John, Claire, can't get real. This is really not working for you. Yeah, it's okay. It's helping give some structure. Or finally, is it really driving your program forward? So if we jump to the results, as you'd expect, with the level of maturity, we're seeing a lot of people saying it's too early to tell yet. I'm delighted to see, John, that we haven't got too many people saying that it's not living up to the hype.
Yeah, that's very promising.
And 20% saying, yes, it's giving them some structure, and another 15% are already really seeing that this is driving their program forward. That's really pleasing to see, really pleasing to see.
It is very pleasing to see. If I may just very quickly, I think that for those of you who, for the majority of you for whom it's too early to tell, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but be patient. One of the things that we find in our research is that very often the hard benefit of doing this, as opposed to the soft set of benefits we talked about, which are often almost immediately evident to people in an organization, even if they're not measuring those kind of benefits like establishing a shared vision in any concrete way. But some of the harder benefits from doing this, there is a lag time. There's no question about it. And in fact, at some large companies like FedEx, Fidelity, really leading companies in terms of these methods, they've actually had to rejigger their own internal goals for employees and goals for managers, because they've recognized that when you're taking this outside-in view of your services and products, it takes a while to get all your ducks in a row. And it's one thing to document it and have a quote-unquote shared understanding, but it's another thing to get that actually executed and to see what the benefit has been. It's very, very often that the lag time is a little bit more than people anticipated.
Yeah, excellent. So, keep the faith. And so many people are early in their journey that it's not surprising that it's too early to tell. But it's great to see that those that are getting into using customer journey mapping are really seeing that it's giving structure and driving the program forward. That's really good. So our third and final section was really to talk about this piece around the true power of the journey map is when it's being used to proactively prompt all of the key functions within our organization about what their next move should be. And this really kind of brings me back to my analogy of the Marauders Map in Harry Potter. And I know it's a little bit fantastical, but anyway, it's not something that we want to be a static picture. What we should be doing is using the map to really help us as we go on this journey towards where we want to be. So maybe the Marauders Map is not something that we've got in the glove box, and it must be said that if anybody's tried to drive with a map, it's fraught with problems, isn't it? So what we want to see with our customer journey map is that it's not a paper map. It's much more our vehicle's navigation system. It's something that's there and available to us at all times, to everyone across the organization, really to give people a nudge and to tell them what the situation is and help them understand what they should be doing next and where to focus their attention and resources. It's so much more benefit than our customer experience team having to stand in the middle of the road waving your arms around madly to be able actually to place this customer journey map into each of the cars of each of your silos within your organization. And critically, what that needs to do is three things. Firstly, it needs to alert people as to when things are going wrong and when there's a potential problem in front of them. Now, in this example, bringing it back to customer experience rather than the maps, it could be that there's a particular problem with one of your touch points on your journey. So having that capability of being able to show people very simplistically with a red, amber, green color code, this is the touch point. Something is going wrong here now. You need to take action. It might be with regard to a particular touch point, or it might be a particular area of your business. And I must put out a thank you to my colleague who built this for me and decided that the UK, of course, had to be the problem. My colleague works in the States, as you can imagine. So thank you for that. So we need to understand if there's a problem. As with our sat-nav, help me understand if there's an accident ahead that I'm heading towards that I need to try and avoid. But when it comes to this guidance about what should I do about the issue, we really need to ensure that our customer journey map is able to support each part of our organization in understanding what they should do about it. And now we're getting much more into more classical customer experience piece around let's understand what is driving those issues with regard to that particular touch point on the customer journey, and let's understand what action we need to take to drive change in that particular area. And finally, the third piece around this navigation on the move is rather than the customer experience team having to be out there on the road and making sure that they understand where everybody is and that they are moving forward in the right direction at the right speed, wouldn't it be fantastic if back at centre we had a kind of traffic control where we were able to monitor the action that is being taken across our organisation, absolutely around specific issues with individual customers, but also around putting right those more systemic issues within our organisation and actually ensuring that we can have got that predictive power to say, we know where we want to go, we know the road that we need to take to get us there, and actually we can be confident that we're going to get to that end state within a time period that's reasonable. I think from my perspective, with many programs that I've seen over the years, this is the key issue, is that we do understand often, where we want to be and what good looks like, but we're always looking in that rear view mirror. We're always looking behind ourselves to be saying, okay, how did we do last month? How did we do last week? Even how did we do yesterday? What we need to start to do, and I strongly believe that customer journey mapping can help us with this, is really start to predict, are we going to get where we want to be within a time scale that we've agreed with our exec and board. Okay, so with that, with this key piece around understanding the value that we're looking to deliver, John, maybe you'd like to take over and take us into that the last poll.
Yes. Let's finally assess where you've seen benefits in the journey mapping exercises that you have conducted so far. And by the way, so many of you are just starting out. If some of this is aspirational, that's fine. But are you finding that journey mapping is most helpful in providing clarity on your customers' actual experiences? And you can choose multiple answers here. This is not just one and done. Are you using it primarily? Are you finding the benefit in mapping out current state, or identifying priorities for improvement, or is it a cultural change tool for you, or do you hope it will be a cultural change tool? Rallying for different functions or monitoring improvement over time. Where's the benefit for you folks with journey mapping? Now, this is very interesting. So, yeah, it's a much more even distribution.
We really wanted to put up another option, didn't we, John? Because I'm sure we've not picked all of the benefits.
We collectively decided that these were the more popular kinds of benefits, but you never know. This is really interesting. I think that. Mapping out current state, identifying priorities for improvement, providing clarity to the customer, that is what, God willing, journey mapping will always do for you. And I'm not surprised cultural change tool is lower in monitoring and rallying. That makes some sense to me. I find that again, the first sort of, at Forrester we talk about customer experience maturity, and overwhelmingly most companies now, I'd say probably 80% of the companies that we've studied are in a fairly immature state with respect to customer experience. And what we mean by that is they're using tools like journey mapping in a diagnostic or find and fix mode. And it's a handful of companies, and sometimes a handful of business units within those companies that are using journey mapping for future state or monitoring improvement over time, which I would say is a pretty advanced function. I don't know what you think, Claire, but that 29% is pretty healthy for that particular application. And cultural change tool, I think that's a tricky one. It's an important one, and we find that the tool is very good at this. But just for what it's worth, it's not surprising that just over a third of you are using it in that way. I think that is a more advanced application.
I think it is, but I think it is something that's really falling out for me from customer journey mapping, is this opportunity to use it as a rallying point. Customer experience programs are all about change management, are all around ensuring that people do something differently tomorrow than they did yesterday, because that's how we're going to drive change. That's how we're going to drive improvement within our organizations. So I think customer experience as a whole is a culture change tool within organizations. But customer journey mapping, for me, is quite a pragmatic approach and really something that we can get our teeth into using as a culture change tool.
Yeah, I agree. And just, here in conclusion, more or less, I'd like to, if we may, move on to some recommendations. And these are recommendations that have come from the research that we've done at Forrester over the past few years about how leading customer experience managers who've had great success with journey mapping, not just as a one-off or as a diagnostic tool, but as a real agent of change, a tool for change, how they've succeeded in what they've done. And I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts here. So many of you are using them for diagnostic purposes and rallying to get a shared vision. If you want to maintain momentum, what we found is that the folks who do this really well and have had great results across the organization, they're constantly bringing together a purpose-driven coalition. What I mean by this is that they're not just pulling together people from business technology and accounting because they've been told to do so, but they're very, very keen in those soft skills. CX managers have really good soft skills, and they know the importance of soft skills in recruiting the right people who are purpose-driven. They want to solve the problem of, say, for example, moving or transferring your cable or phone service from one address to another. They know that's a pain point. CX managers who form teams that are really concerned about this and know that it's a potential deal breaker for their clients and is creating artificially high churn rates, those are the people you want on that team. Creating that sense of urgency, it's a similar point. For many organizations, you've got to show the numbers. It's a data-driven sense of urgency that you're talking about. In other cases, it's actually the map itself that can be used as a tool to go around the organization as part of the validation phase and say, hey, look, this is what we did. We being me and seven of our peers, we found these gaps in the customer experience. Do you agree with this? Do you think this is a problem? That often is a very effective way of getting people engaged, again, with this tool to make them understand that actually their job is having an impact on the customer experience, perhaps a very negative impact, and recruiting that person to solve those problems. But creating that sense of urgency. The people who succeed with journey mapping don't start with some trivial or unimportant customer experience or pain point. They start with something that's important. They start with something that they know they can get people interested in, but everyone sort of knows in their gut is a real problem. Or maybe they know from verbatims and social media and contact center tickets that it's a real problem. But you start with something that is urgent, something that's a real source of pain, and you recruit accordingly. It's imperative that you set the map scope, scale, and what we call offshoots. Right? You want to make sure this is a constrained exercise at first. That's why map atlases, I think, are taking off. That's a kind of interesting effect of doing journey mapping the right way. You don't want to map everything all at once. You want to have the scope very well defined, and you want to be able to explain to people why you're using that particular task or that job or that experience as your journey mapping exercise, and what you intend the offshoots to be. It may be an ecosystem mapping exercise. You may then use that map to do a deep dive on some processes and tools in one particular part of the ecosystem, but be very explicit about what your plans are for this map. Maps for empathy. Don't ever forget that this is ideally about creating greater empathy in your organization for what human beings are actually experiencing on the other end of what you do for a living. It's something that we have found is one of the more critical elements of a journey mapping experience, is taking that red dot or using that red pen and circling a Post-it note or a step in the journey that is absolutely killing your business, that you know is driving people crazy. Getting people to open up about that and understand why that's a problem in a non-confrontational way is one of the real strengths of this tool. You're mapping for empathy. Never forget that. That's what makes a journey mapping tool particularly powerful and fungible across so many different disciplines. When you're mapping for empathy, you're going to shed light on what's missing in your metrics. You're going to shed light for designers on where they need to concentrate their efforts and bring their skills to solving for that problem, making that emotional, maybe that anxiety or that anger dissipate. Mapping for empathy is absolutely a best practice, and it can be really as simple as just flagging parts of that journey that with red sticky notes that are terrible, or drawing frowny faces, or whatever works for you folks. But make sure you include that emotional component in this exercise. Validate and socialize. So many customer experience professionals we work with are in matrixed organizations. They don't really own much. They have a small team, and change is tough. No one likes change, and you're not doing yourself any favors if you walk around with a journey map and you claim that you've figured out your company's problems. You want to use the journey map as a way to validate. Right? These are some problems that we found. Do you agree? What would you add to this? And begin that socialization process in a constructive way so that you get buy-in as opposed to pushback. And make sure you demonstrate short-term wins. And those wins can be soft wins and hard wins. They can be only hard wins. You got to know where your power core is in your organization and ultimately who your boss is and what's going to make him or her really smile and invest further resources and money in this kind of customer understanding exercise. But it's imperative that you begin with a set of metrics that you want to be able to prove, and get those metrics in writing and be able to show what it is you've accomplished with this. Because in most organizations, if you're not really able to show a result, you're not going to get much funding going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, John. That was really insightful and useful. So really it just comes back to me to say thank you. Maybe not quite as cool as the Marauders Map. I'm sure my son doesn't think it's quite as cool as the Marauders Map. But hopefully John and I have been able to show you some of the power of customer journey mapping and how it can be used to empower your organization, ensure that we're all heading in the right direction, and critically this piece around providing guidance on the way. So maybe now, Dina, we need to open it up to some questions. Everybody's been sitting very quietly listening to us for far too long now.
I've actually been monitoring the questions, and there are quite a bit coming in. We are getting close to the top of the hour, so we'll dive right into it. One question is, would an atlas be helpful in breaking down a complex customer life cycle?
Would an
Joe,
atlas
do you want
be?
to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I'm understanding the question correctly, would an atlas be helpful in breaking down yes, that is in fact, to give you a little background on this, the very first atlas that Tony Costa uncovered was from a B2B company. And for those of you in the B2B space, as you know, these customer journeys can be very, very complex, and you can actually have multiple end users involved, so-called end users, buyers, end users themselves, and so forth. And breaking down each one of those journeys was necessary, but by using an atlas, they were able to show where the buyer and seller's experiences overlapped, where they didn't have much insight into that handoff or that relationship. So yes, absolutely. An atlas is a really, really good way of starting to tease out the complexity of these sometimes very complex life cycles.
You're absolutely right, John. I think it's that complexity that it really helps with. And remember also, it's not a kind of two-dimensional matrix. It's not just around the customer journey and the different channels. I think the piece around different customer segments and different customer personas is really important as well, which is very difficult to show on a 2D slide. But keeping that in mind, and again, getting people to use this as a framework of understanding, and not saying that we've got all of the answers straight away, particularly when we're just starting to use the tool.
That's right. I mean, I find that one of the things that journey mapping, especially atlases, do for organizations, admittedly there are a few examples I can point to, but of the handful that I know of, they're yet another way to reframe or rethink a hypothesis. So yeah, absolutely. Very helpful. Or isolate a hypothesis, really focus on what the problem actually is as opposed to what you think it may be.
Yeah.
I think this one can probably be answered by both of you again. Can you share concrete examples of business challenges where the customer journey map has been applied and how it helped?
Sure. Can I take a stab at that one, Claire, really quickly?
Of course, go for it.
My favorite example of this is actually a couple of years old, but it's just too good to throw away. So there was a large telecom company here in the United States that got religion about customer experience because of a change at the C-level. And the new CEO was just committed that this is the only way we're going to be able to compete in a very, very screwed up market that's totally complicated and regulated and blah, blah, blah. They hired a gentleman to run their customer experience program who had a lot of success in the customer service sector, the customer service world in that industry before. And he immediately found the most painful customer journey they had, which happened to be a small business owner's customer journey, installing a router for his small business service. And he identified a very specific problem there, which was that 100%, not 90%, but 100% of the routers they installed failed. They failed. Now, what he did was he knew that they failed, but he mapped the journey. It's a very simple journey. Small business owner calls, orders the service, the technician shows up with a router, installs the router fails. And what he found by doing this journey mapping, by then identifying the people who supported each step in the journey, the processes, right, and the departments that were responsible, that interacted with the customer for each part of this journey, that there was an interesting step there, which was that the technicians were prohibited by a prior contract to actually physically touch the router to make the repair, because the router was manufactured by a third-party company that did not want this telco's technicians fooling around with it. And this is something that no one had ever thought was a real problem, or where the source of the problem was, until they actually went through this journey mapping exercise and realized that the problem was not the technicians being stupid or unionized or whatever they thought the problem was, and not that the operators were uninformed, and not that the customers were fat-fingering router controls, but the problem was in a legal document. And they knew that it was in the legal department they had to focus their efforts, because it was the technician who was actually involved with the journey mapping exercise that said, I am prohibited by law to do this, I promise you. So that's and by the way, when they found that out, guess what the legal department said? Oh, that's an old contract term. That should have been deleted years ago. Sorry. Within 20 minutes, the terms were gone. Next thing you know, you've got 98% router success.
Wow.
So that's one of my favorite stories, because very often you will find that when you go through these journey mapping exercises, it's not just the website team's fault. It's not the contact center's fault. It could be legal. It could be billing. It could be a paper artifact that's confusing people, that's driving so many of those calls. It's amazing where those if you do the 5 whys of why that's a problem, which is a best practice also when you're doing this, you'll be amazed at where you find some of those skeletons in the closet.
Amazing. I won't go into too much detail because I'm just aware time is ticking away. But just thinking about telcos, another example that I have, another telco, is this piece when you actually start outsourcing parts of your process. Usually, in this instance with this telco, I can't name them unfortunately. It was the sales process, right at the front end, and this piece around not having a shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and also that consistency of brand across different organizations. And what this organization found that was using the customer journey map and bringing people together from their outsourced supplier as well as the internal team, and bringing those two groups together really drove a much better understanding of the implications of what they said around the expectations that they set at the sales part of the process, because obviously they're being bonused on how many sales they make, not thinking about the implications further down the customer journey when actually the organization isn't delivering to the expectations that have been set right up front.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. If you have B2B and B2C business model, can you map them on one atlas?
Depends on your business, but there's no reason why you couldn't. I mean, especially if you have this wonderful overlap, which so many B2B to C companies do have, and you may not even know you have that overlap until you start combining these journeys into an atlas. So I don't see why, theoretically, I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that.
No, I think you're right. It depends on if they're very separate parts of the organization, or, as you say, John, if they overlap at all in the B2B2C type engagement, again, where it's around ensuring everybody's individual steps in the process. But I think the other beauty of a customer journey map is that it can identify some, small journeys, some little trips or some little goals that people are trying to achieve, and actually they are replicated across that customer journey atlas. And actually by putting that small process right, actually you're going to be impacting more than one customer journey. So I think it's this piece that many people feel that B2B versus B2C is very different from a customer experience perspective. In my personal opinion, is that other than the account management piece on the B2B side of things, which I think is quite specialized, and we need to add some very careful thought into how you manage those types of relationships. But we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater with the B2C stuff. There's a lot of activity that can be transferred across.
And one thing I will say here, just very quickly in closing, don't misunderstand me or Claire, and we're not suggesting that the atlas is the next logical step after journey mapping. There is another kind of mapping that I alluded to called ecosystem mapping, which may be the answer to your problem. Sometimes what happens is a company that has a B2B2C or B2B and a B2C line of business, they'll start mapping a journey in one or the other. and they want to uncover some problems, the underlying problems, the systems problems that are getting in the way of that customer being happy with that experience. And that's when the ecosystem mapping part of this exercise takes over. And you really concentrate on drawing the lines from that web application or from that contact center script or that bill or that document to those different departments and people across your ecosystem. And sometimes that's where the partners come in. In many cases, a customer journey, a B2C journey, is actually supported by your own B2B relationships in a way that you might not have ever actually realized. And the journey mapping tool can be, again, a lens, a first pass at understanding exactly where your own B2B relationships are complicating the B2C relationship you're managing.
Okay, thanks, John.
Sure.
So we are, we did go a little bit over, but that's okay. It looks like everybody was very interested in this topic. Claire and John, thank you both so much for presenting today. And as a reminder to all of our attendees, the recording and the presentation will be shared with you via email, so please keep an eye out for that. We hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and thank you again for joining.
Thank you.